So with Marvel's Avengers 2 Age of Ultron coming out, one of the big questions a lot of people have is, what's the deal with the Vision? A lot of people want to know about the Vision because in truth, Marvel hasn't really revealed a lot of information about the Vision's role or what he'll be doing in the Avengers 2 Age of Ultron. All we really know is that Paul Bettany will be playing the role of the Vision. And so again, we don't know how far deep this is going to go. And so what we're going to do in this video is we're going to talk about the Vision in Marvel Comics. That way you guys will have a frame of reference when you guys are actually looking at the Vision and the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, the first thing that we have to recognize here is that the Vision that we see, the one that we most commonly think of in Marvel Comics, is actually not the first one. The original Vision appeared during the Golden Age of Marvel Comics in Marvel Mystery issue number 13, but keep in mind, as we've discussed in previous videos in relation to the Golden Age of Comics, when the Golden Age was really coming to an end, when it was really beginning to taper off, Marvel and I guess Timely and Atlas Comics and even DC Comics themselves were really beginning to move comic books in a direction more along the lines of mystery and suspense and sci-fi and so on. And so Roy Thomas at the time had really delved into this realm by introducing the original person named the Vision. Now this Vision was a being named Arcus, and Arcus was kind of this intergalactic, I guess, police officer or bounty hunter of sorts. And the way that the role had played out here was that some scientists had effectively opened a portal from to the smoke world, which is quite literally what it was called, and that this version of the Vision was able to actually enter the, I guess, Earth 616 continuity, if that's how we want to refer to it, and he began the process of basically fighting crime and so on and so forth. Now again, keeping up with a lot of characters who were introduced during this time frame around World War II, prior to World War II, and so on, he had joined the forces of the Allied powers fighting against the Axis powers in World War II. And again, this really just kind of ties into a lot of the comic themes that we had seen, where a lot of characters were basically pro-American propaganda. Now, the Vision that we most commonly think of, that is to say the one that we'll see in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, first appeared in the Avengers issue number 57. Now, the way this character came about was really more of a I guess a compromise between Stan Lee and Roy Thomas. Stan Lee wanted to introduce a new kind of character. He wanted to introduce somebody that had never been seen before. But Roy Thomas wanted to bring back the Golden Age Vision. And this made sense because the Golden Age Vision was established. He had had interactions with the original Human Torch. He was a character that people going into the Silver Age who had previously read the Golden Age already knew of. And so it would be very easy for Marvel to really just kind of build on this continuity and go forward. And so ultimately they sort of agreed at the very least to have an android version, but again to call him the Vision, but to make him a totally different person here instead of being an alien. And so what we find is that with Avengers issue number 57, when the Vision first appears, the Vision's simply just there. He just arrives. We don't really know how he got there. We don't know where he came from. All we know is that he seems to be an enemy of the Avengers. And the reason why we know this is because the first act that he commits is to attack Janet Van Dyne. Now, the way the story begins to unfold, Janet Van Dyne apparently is going to spend the night at home as opposed to going out with Hank Pym, because remember, at this time, the two of them are a romantic couple. They're not actually married yet. And so when she arrives inside of her home, almost immediately she's attacked by the Vision. Now, of course, she goes through the normal process that we saw with superheroes where she shrinks down to her wasp form. She tries to escape, and when she shuts the door, she presumably believes that the Vision's going to be trapped inside, and there's really no way for him to break through. But what the Vision does is he actually, I guess, moves through a wall and again continues to pursue Janet Van Dyne, continues to pursue the Wasp. And so as she's really kind of fighting for her life here, Hank Pym realizes what's going on. He turns into his giant man form and he goes to try to rescue Janet Van Dyne. But at the same time, while this is happening, the Vision, for some reason or another, which we don't know, seems to have some sort of pain in his mind and then simply just collapses. And so once Hank Pym arrives at the apartment of Janet Van Dyne, they agree the best thing for them to do is to basically take the Vision back to Avengers headquarters. That way they can really analyze his body. They can figure out what's going on with him. They can try to understand why it is that the Vision is doing what he's doing. And so again, what we find as we continue with Avengers number 57 is that the Avengers are called together. And at Avengers headquarters, of course, again, they begin to look over the body and look over the design of the Vision. And what happens here is that the Vision, I guess, wakes up from having passed out and then immediately attacks the Avengers. And when he does, he basically is really reciting this kind of this logic, basically telling them he was designed for the purpose of attacking them. But what's really interesting here is that Black Panther seems to pick up on something we didn't really notice before, in the sense that what the Vision is doing is basically acting like someone who's in a trance, in the sense that he's been more or less hypnotized, or he's been assigned a task, but he doesn't know why he's doing this. All he knows is that he's doing it because he was told to. And so the Vision seemingly seems to stop his attack on the Avengers, and he begins to basically talk with them and again try to figure out what's going on. And so what he does does is he begins to probe his mind. He begins to look into why it is that this is happening. And what he realizes, or what he remembers, is that he was created by Ultron to destroy the Avengers. And so the Avengers, realizing, of course, the threat that Ultron faced, in the sense that they had previously faced Ultron one time before, of course, his initial introduction into Marvel Comics, immediately go on the offensive. And of course, the Vision says that he feels as though he's not supposed to be attacking them, that in some form or fashion, they're supposed to be allies here. And so what the Vision does is he agrees to lead the Avengers to the headquarters, or I guess to the base of operations for Ultron. And what we do is we switch to Ultron here, and what we learn is that this was all part of Ultron's plan, that Ultron had initially created the Vision, and the Vision, again, as he had told us, was designed to kill the Avengers, but that should this have failed, that there was basically a subroutine, a backup program installed in the Vision, so that his programming would, I guess, allow him or require him to bring the Avengers to Ultron, so that Ultron could destroy the Avengers on his own. And so what happens is, of course, as the group enters Ultron's base, the Avengers are basically trapped. They're really kind of confined in this room with these ever-closing walls that would inevitably squish them and kill them off, and the Vision confronts Ultron. And what's really interesting here is that the Vision really conducts himself like a rebellious subordinate, like someone who is, I guess, who was created for a single purpose, but is rebelling against that purpose. And so he tells Ultron that ultimately he doesn't want to do this, that he doesn't want to fight the Avengers. He wants to join the Avengers, but more so than that, he wants to know what his purpose is. He wants to know why he's here, the reason why he was made. Of course, Ultron refuses to tell them this, and in response, of course, Ultron seemingly attacks the Vision, and the Vision seems to be able to thwart his attack, and Ultron seems destroyed in the process. And so what we do is we pick up with Avengers issue number 58. And in Avengers issue number 58, we get a little more to this story. We actually see more or less that we're picking up directly after Avengers issue number 57. And what happens here is the Avengers agree to induct the Vision into their ranks, but only once they actually find out what his purpose is, why it is that he was made, and even more than that, who he is. And so again, as they continue here, what happens is that Hank Pym recalls making some kind of an android, but he doesn't really remember what it was. And so what the group does is they travel back to the old suburban lab of Hank Pym. And again, what this does, this actually picks up with our Ultron discussion, where we learn about why Ultron was made. We actually learn about the fact that Hank Pym was the one that made Ultron, which of course, you're welcome to check out our Ultron video if you want to get into that. But what Hank Pym also recalls is that at some point along the line, that the memories, or I guess the mind, the tapes of Wonder Man had been stored within the confines of this lab, and that they're now missing. And so what happens, of course, Hawkeye asks who Wonder Man was, and Iron Man begins to explain here. And what we find is that somewhere along the line, a man named Simon Williams had approached the Avengers and wanted to join their ranks. But the problem here is that he was suffering from an illness that was going to kill him. Of course, due to the fact that he had super strength, that he seemed to be a pretty solid guy, the Avengers inducted him into their ranks. But the problem is that Simon Williams was a double agent, but he didn't really seem to be a double agent, I guess, of his own accord. What had happened here was that he was basically being held against his own will by Baron Zemo, and Baron Zemo had basically been blackmailing him, telling him that he would not give him the cure to his disease unless he fought on his behalf. And so what Wonder Man did is he lured the Avengers into a trap, and in the process, Baron Zemo revealed that his intention was to kill the Avengers. And so because Wonder Man didn't want to partake in this, he actually freed Thor, but in the process, Baron Zemo escaped, and with him went the cure. And so Wonder Man had died in the arms of the Avengers. But what Hank Pym had done is he had scanned the mind of Wonder Man, and when he did, he had stored these scans in his lab. And so when Ultron had emerged, when Ultron had rebelled against Hank Pym when he was first created, and had wiped Hank Pym's mind of anything resembling memories about Ultron, that when Hank Pym left, Ultron began reassembling the lab. And what Ultron did is he took the memories, or took the mind patterns of Wonder Man, and he used them to create the Vision. And so what we find as this issue, as issue number 58 begins to come to an end, is that we pick up with, again, the Avengers as they're talking about the Vision. And what they decide is that because the Vision had basically risked his life to save them, that their best bet here is to let the Vision become a member of the Avengers, because as far as they're concerned, he's done everything that he can to prove himself as a worthy member. And so what this does is this basically marks the time in which the Vision will officially become a member of the Avengers, moving forward for quite some time in Marvel Comics. And so following the appearance of the Vision in Marvel Comics, what we saw is that in 1968, Marvel had Avengers issues number 66 and 69 going. And what this was basically the Vision continuing to deal with the idea that he was more or less a copy of Wonder Man. And in fact, in issue number 66, what we find is that the Vision actually visits the grave of Wonder Man. Because again, this is very much an element that will stick with the Vision. For those of you guys who were fans of Star Trek, whether you were fans of the original Star Trek or the Next Generation, generation, the Vision can best be compared to Spock or Data respectively, in the sense that he was a cyborg, or I guess a synthetic, that had elements of him that made him human, but he was always aspiring to become more human. He was always aspiring to, I guess, develop this identity of his own so that he could kind of break away from the shadow of Wonder Man, but it was something that he was never really able to do. And so what we found over the course of this series of issues number 66 through 69 is that Vision is ultimately taken over again by Ultron, and by virtue of this action, he's forced into making an adamantium body for Ultron. And so, of course, we see that Ultron is defeated at the hands of the Avengers, as we would expect. And so what we do is we move on to Avengers issue number 75. And with issues number 75 in 1970, what we find is that Quicksilver and the Scarlet Witch return to the Avengers. And this is really an important element here, because what this is going to do is effectively set the stage for a lot of the events that come forward later on. With issue number 108 in 1973, the Scarlet Witch, and the Vision officially started dating one another. Now, it's very subtle in the way that this is done. This is really just an instance whereby the Vision is basically comforting the Scarlet Witch, where he tells her that if she needs to, she can basically cry on his shoulder. And of course, we see that Thor chimes in and simply tells the group to give these two some time, which we know that just by virtue of human interaction and the way things work, that ultimately this will lead into a relationship between the two of them. And in Avengers issue number 109, Marvel more or less cements this, but they really only cement it by the two of them holding hands. And the reason for this, the reason why Marvel doesn't overtly have the two of them showing any real manner of affection, is for a couple reasons. The first is because of the Comics Code Authority. Of course, the Comics Code Authority, established in 1954, was basically a set of guidelines whereby comic books had to basically print their material or write the material in such a way to where it was respectful of society at the time. And one of the conditions was that there couldn't be any overt sexual activity between two individuals. That is to say, at the time when this comic had come out in the 1970s, and especially, in the previous era in the 1960s, when comic books were very big during the Silver Age, individuals were able to show affection to one another, but they could only really do it by virtue of maybe holding hands or by virtue of saying they care about one another. They couldn't, they couldn't involve themselves in overt sexual activities such as kissing. And so all they really had the two of them do was just hold hands. And so in 1975, with Giant Size Avengers issue number 4, the Scarlet Witch and the Vision officially marry one another. Now, in truth, as Roy Thomas had told us, this really just kind of was done in practicality. This really just kind of made sense here. And the reason why was because you had two individuals. You had the Vision, who was on a hunt for, to enhance his humanity, to become more human. But more so than that, he wanted to fit in. He wanted companionship. And then you had the Scarlet Witch, who had this very screwed up and isolated life, and who in a lot of ways wanted some measure of normalcy. And the two of them just kind of latched on to one another. They just kind of found themselves. Although I would go as far as to say this relationship was ultimately doomed to failure because it was one that was founded under the guise of two individuals dealing with the negative aspects of their lives as opposed to the positive aspects. And so what happens is that 7 years after this, in 1982, Marvel launches, a solo series called The Vision and Scarlet Witch. And the reason why they had done this was because there was some interest, a moderate amount of interest with regards to the Scarlet Witch and the Vision in terms of the relationship. But what we had found was that when Bill Mantlo and Rick Leonardi had put this comic together, this series together, there wasn't as much interest as Marvel thought. And so the series only ran for about 4 issues. But Marvel brought it back in Volume 2 in 1985 with Steve Englehart and Richard Howell. And what they did is they introduced the concept of the Scarlet Witch having children, having 2 twin boys. Now, she was able to conceive by virtue of magic, but that was really the only information that we got. We didn't really know exactly how this had happened. The Scarlet Witch was simply just, just informed her husband that she was pregnant one day. And so what we saw was that in 1984, Marvel launched Avengers West Coast, or what would later become known as the West Coast Avengers, or at least that would kind of be given the name that a lot of fans would take on for the team. But what we saw was that Roger Stern had initially pushed this, and this was really just a way for Marvel to branch out into the realm of introducing more Avengers titles, to the possibility of having separate teams on different parts of the country. But what we saw was that in 1988, the Scarlet Witch and Vision had joined the team. And again, for the most part, they continued on about their normal roles, their normal acts as part of the West Coast Avengers. They were simply superheroes engaging in different activities. And so from here, what we do is we continue with Volume 1 of West Coast Avengers, and we see that in 1989, John Byrne runs a series called, I guess, The Vision Quest, which takes place in issues 42 through 45. And what had happened here is that John Byrne, who was now the writer and the penciler, I guess the artist for this particular story, didn't like the direction that Marvel had taken with the Vision and the Scarlet Witch. For him, it seemed very silly that we would have an android that would exist in the realm of the Vision, an android that was hunting for humanity. He also didn't like the idea that magic and different things like that had basically taken the place of actual contraception between the Scarlet Witch and the Vision. And so what he did here is he basically wiped the slate clean. He started all over again. And what happened is that over the course of this series, the Vision is basically disassembled. He's destroyed, and Hank McCoy is along with various other people. I'm sorry, Hank Pym along with various other people try to reassemble him, but ultimately they just can't quite get the element that made him human. That is to say, they can't replicate the mind patterns of Simon Williams of Wonder Man. Now, the reason why they can't do it is for a couple reasons. One, because they can't actually find the patterns to do it. But two, while Simon Williams is alive during the West Coast Avengers, while he's been restored back to the Marvel landscape, he's unwilling to do this. And the reason why is because for Simon Williams, his brain patterns being copied were done against his will, and he felt like it was stripping him of what it was that made him who he was, that there was basically a copy of him running around out there. And so what John Byrne did is he gave us the Vision back, but the Vision had lost all the coloring to himself. He was actually just a pure white individual with a pure white cape. Not only that, he was devoid of all emotion. And so what this did was effectively create a rift between him and the Scarlet Witch. In addition, we learned that the Scarlet Witch's children weren't actually real. They weren't really children, and instead, they were the shards of Mephisto. And so everything that had really established this family element for the Scarlet Witch and the Vision was totally eliminated. It was gone completely. And so while this rift formed, ultimately the two of them split apart. And so what we find is that over the course of the remaining comics, the comics leading up to Avengers Volume 3, issue number 12 in 1999, the two of them basically operate on two different levels. The Vision continues to try to regain his humanity. He tries to regain what it is that made him unique, that made him an individual that could really be something more than just an android. The Scarlet Witch, of course, continues her actions and goes about her life, which again, we cover a lot of this during our video on the Scarlet Witch. But ultimately what happens is that these circumstances lead up to the Avengers Disassembled event. And of course, as we had talked about in Avengers Disassembled with our videos, the Vision had appeared, and the Vision had began coughing up various, spheres, and in turn, these spheres turned into versions of Ultron that started attacking Avengers Mansion. But what Marvel doesn't tell us here, and something they've never explained to this day, is why it is this had happened. If this had happened because the Scarlet Witch made the Vision do it, or if this had happened because this was some kind of subroutine programmed into the Vision by Ultron, if the Avengers had ever sent out a white call distress signal. Marvel's never given us an answer to that question, and at this point, given the fact that the story's so old, I doubt they ever will. Now from here, we're going to go ahead and bring this video to an end, and the reason why is because this is going to lead into the Marvel Now event. And of course, with Marvel Now, Marvel had basically rebooted the character of the Vision. They had actually given him a new identity and made him a new person entirely. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and bring this video to an end. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, let me know, and I will catch you guys later. Peace.